guest line. Check out favorites.com and go with the home team, Mississippi Farm Bureau. Ryan Brown joins us from The Next Round. You can find them online at The Next Round Live. Daily multimedia show. I keep trying to call it a radio show, and it's that and so much more. It's everything. Based in Birmingham, SEC, Alabama, Auburn, lots of great stuff. If you hadn't checked it out, you should do that. What's up, bud?
Man, I'm awesome. You guys doing all right over there?
We are. The weather is miserable, but it will change soon enough, I suppose.
We did not get the ice and all of that in Birmingham. Did you guys get ice? I know like in North Mississippi they did. I saw some olive branch ice, but we did not get any here in Birmingham, thank God.
Yeah, to the north and west of us, it was not great, but Oxford was like right on the line, and we got a lot of cold rain. Enough cold rain to have start time for school pushed back 2 days in a row by 2 hours, which that wasn't all bad, and enough cold rain with the potential for the streets to be bad for the band and the cheerleaders not to be at the Ole Miss Kentucky basketball game last night. That's how much cold rain we've had.
Wow, that's a obvious oversight. You got to fight through that to make the Kentucky game. Come on.
Yeah, you would think so. Best student crowd that Ole Miss has had in probably 2 or 3 seasons, but those particular portions of the student body couldn't make it. Nevertheless, hey, I've been wanting to talk to you for a couple of weeks now. That's how long we've had these openings on the Alabama staff, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. But before we talk about the direction that Nick Saban may be going, let's talk about Pete Golding. This feels like a coup for Ole Miss. Now, there are people that would immediately push back and be like, no. Nick Saban wanted to make a change. He wanted to go in a different direction. And that may be true. In fact, that might be that you could have 2 things that are true at the same time, because it feels like Ole Miss got a good defensive coordinator and a good recruiter in Pete Golding. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is obviously true. They did get what I think is a good defensive coordinator, and he is an excellent recruiter. And Nick Saban was very fond of Pete Golding. I don't if anybody is saying Nick Saban was going to fire Pete Golding, I don't think that's true at all. If a job like Ole Miss came along, was Nick Saban going to stand in his way? I also don't think that was true. But Pete Golding, Nick Saban was his biggest fan, and the fans did not reflect that. Alabama fans were very, very critical of Pete Golding. And to be fair to Pete, there were a couple things. Number one, his defensive numbers were acceptable, or actually above acceptable, most anywhere in America. But when you get Kirby Smart and Jeremy Pruitt taste, it's kind of hard to accept anything less than that. And the other thing, Pete Golding caught college football in a more offensive cycle than Jeremy Pruitt or Kirby Smart caught college football. When those guys were coordinators at Alabama, the game was a little more defensive than it is right now. So, there were a lot of factors that conspired against Pete Golding being immensely popular among Alabama fans. But I do believe Nick Saban was very, very fond of him, and I do not believe Nick Saban was going to fire him by any stretch of the imagination.
Do you think Nick Saban encouraged him to look for other opportunities, or you think it was as simple as there were times in the past where he really pushed back against suitors, and this time he was like, maybe it is a good time?
Yeah, I mean, it might be a semantics game, Richard. I don't know the answer to that. Nick Saban is very close to the vest, so anything you hear is just speculation. I do know that there are times. I think Steve Sarkisian wanted to hire Pete Golding when he took the Texas job, and Nick Saban really fought against that and convinced Pete Golding that it was better for him to stay at Alabama. So did he encourage him to leave? I don't know. Did he say, "Look, I'm not going to stand in your way"? I mean, I think you're getting into a semantics game at that point. But I don't think Pete Golding did this without Nick Saban's blessing, as odd as that may sound. But again, I want to point out, and I'll tell you this story. So Alabama's coaching or athletics administration, whatever, they invite media to be the media coaches for the 8A game, which basically means you get in the locker room, you watch it, you stand on the sidelines. I mean, you don't really have any role except that it's just a way for you to kind of see behind the scenes, right? So Pete Golding's, I think it was his first year. So what is that, 17? We were either 17 or 18. It was early in the Pete Golding. He was the defensive coordinator for the team that my show coached, right? Michael Loxley was the head coach, and he was the assistant. So I guess that was 18. And being in the locker room and watching him coach, I was blown away by Pete Golding. Blown away by Pete Golding. I mean, I came away from that game. That was actually my takeaway, is I was so impressed by the way he handled himself, the way he talked, and he had just come from UTSA, so I knew nothing about the guy. And I thought at the time it was a weird hire because he was the defensive coordinator at UTSA, and when he was hired in Tuscaloosa, Tosh Lapoy had just taken over as the defensive coordinator after Pruitt took the Tennessee job. So you were leaving a coordinator's job to come kind of be in a position coach. And I remember thinking that guy is a rising star in this business. And, like I said, the numbers just weren't as good as Pruitt and Kirby Smart. So, maybe, but when you look at where he was defensively, where he catches a lot of criticism are just the random games like the Tennessee game this year. Alabama could not stop Tennessee. Most teams couldn't except for Georgia. And it cost Alabama the game and probably a shot at the college football playoff. And, when you're a coordinator at Alabama, you can have 11 really good games and have that one bad game, and fans are going to fall out of love with you.
The last thing on this, and I'm curious if Ole Miss fans should look at what Pete Golding did as the defensive coordinator at Southeastern Louisiana and as the defensive coordinator at UTSA more than what he did as coordinator at Alabama, because we know what Alabama's roster looks like. Because when you go back and you look at those two previous stops, his defenses were really good in the leagues that he was in, and seems to kind of figure it out wherever he is.
Yeah, and that said, I would have to go look. I would guess his average was probably 18, 19 points a game on average at Alabama if you took his years there and, averaged it out. I mean, that ought to be enough for Alabama to be undefeated, honestly. I mean, if you're giving up 18, 19 points a game, you probably shouldn't lose many games. So even if you did just look at those, I don't think you even have to completely flush the Alabama. I mean, I think if you gave Lane Kiffin 18 points a game, if you said that's what Pete Golding is going to bring you, 18, 19 points a game scoring defense, my guess is Lane Kiffin would say, I'll take my chances with that. I have enough faith in my offensive play calling with all my quarterbacks now that we can score enough points that 18, 19 points a game is going to have me with a shot at Atlanta potentially.
All right, so where does this leave Alabama on the defensive side? There were early popular names, right? I mean, Jim Leonard, go get Jim Leonard. Go get this guy, or go get Jeremy Pruitt. It doesn't appear that either of those two options are going to materialize. Where's Alabama headed in this defensive coordinator search? Or maybe where should Nick Saban be headed?
Well, so it does appear that the Jeremy Pruitt talk has cooled. You could have hired him by now if you're going to be able to. I mean, he doesn't have a job right now. And it just seems as though there are too many roadblocks there. There's the unknown with the NCAA. I think it is safe to say the Southeastern Conference isn't a big fan of the idea. And it appears that Nick Saban is at least concerned about that. So I would say the Jeremy Pruitt thing is very unlikely right now, which leaves Alabama in an interesting position. There has been talk about Glenn Schumann, who is the co-defensive coordinator at Georgia, and he was part of the staff with Nick Saban when Kirby Smart was there. So this is a guy that's got some Alabama ties, and your thinking would be, well, Will Muschamp is there, Kirby Smart is there. What is your actual role? You're co-defensive coordinator. Are you butting heads all the time with Will Muschamp and Kirby Smart? And he might not be, but, that would be the school of thought there, right? Is that you get to come here, and while Nick Saban casts a big shadow, you're at least going to be the defensive coordinator. It is your show. And he would know what he's getting into with Nick Saban. It's a lot like what he's in with Kirby Smart. And then there's Todd Grantham on the staff. And I can't express to you, he's an analyst right now. I can express to you how unpopular that hire would be among Alabama fans if Nick Saban made that hire. Chris Lowe was on our show the other day, and he brought that name up just in passing. And Chris did like a 15-minute interview with us. And the only thing anybody that consumes our show would focus on was the fact that he mentioned Todd Grantham. And it was universally dismissed as a very bad idea by Alabama fans. And a lot of Alabama fans say, look, I haven't won 7 national championships, so who am I to say? But I think it's a terrible hire. So I don't think that by any stretch of the imagination would be a popular hire if you went Todd Grantham.
It's funny that we kind of dealt with that here a few weeks back when Mike Bobo's name came up as a potential offensive coordinator at Mississippi State. And I was the one that came on the show. I said, look, if Mississippi State wants to hire Mike Bobo, I'm great with that. But if I'm being honest, that is a terrible hire. And it kind of feels people reacting the same way. Like an Auburn fan might look at that and be like, yeah, I'm really good with Alabama going the Todd Grantham route, but that's a terrible hire. Well, let's pick this conversation up in just .com. Ryan Brown from Next Round. The Next Round. The website, though, is nextroundlive.com. Did I get that right? I think I put a "the" on it a minute ago. So there we go. Nextroundlive.com. Yeah, you can just Google it and figure it out. So we were talking about the defensive coordinator job in Alabama. Nick Saban has not filled that role, and Todd Grantham's name is the one we were kicking around just a moment ago. And you said that the reaction from Alabama fans was none too pleasant, though most will kind of defer to Nick Saban, which I guess you have to do. But is that real? Is Nick Saban going to go down that road?
I mean, I would be surprised. I think he's down the list. There's interest. The guy they hired from Southern Miss, I think a lot of Alabama fans say give him a shot before you go to Grantham. At least let the young guy see what he can do. And I think it's unlikely personally. I think the only reason it's mentioned is he's an analyst there and has SEC experience, though I think it's that SEC experience that probably keeps Nick Saban from hiring him. I mean, when Chris said that on our show, it forced me to go back and look. And if you look at his, and I know I don't have to tell a lot of your listeners because they saw it at Mississippi State, but you look at his defenses at State and at Florida, I think only 1 year in his SEC time was he under 20 points per game. So, I mean, I think the numbers speak for themselves that is probably not what Nick Saban is looking for there.
Well, and I said earlier this week, I mean, you may have multiple games where they go out and have 11 sacks, but you may also have multiple games where they get beat 11 times deep. I mean, if the pressure doesn't get home, it's just like feast or famine, like modern-day Jolie Dunn.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, yeah, except he wears socks, right? I remember, I remember Hey Dad getting frustrated when I brought this game up, but I always go back to that 2017 game against Alabama where he blitzed Jalen Hurts every single play. And I hear Hey Dad moving the mic. And finally he
why, man? Aren't we? We're friends, Ron. Why do you do this to me?
I know, Hey Dad, I'm sorry, but I mean, he kept blitzing every play, and then finally
you're right.
That slant to Ridley, and it changed the game. And that's my lasting memory of Todd Grantham.
For what it's worth, I made the same joke about socks yesterday. we're on the exact same wavelength. What about the other side of the ball? Offensive coordinator.
Well, Jeff Lebby, which I know your listeners are very familiar with, was the hot name early, and that has cooled. And you don't know if it's cooled because a lot of people think Jeff Lebby decided to stay at Oklahoma. Some, who are still holding out hope for Lebby are just saying Nick Saban is doing his due diligence, talking to as many people as possible. Ryan Grubb, who is the offensive coordinator at Washington, who had the nation's leading passing offense this year, top 5 in scoring offense, was in Tuscaloosa interviewing, but then chose to stay at Washington. So he's not going to take the job.
Interrupting there for a second. We were talking about Ryan Grubb yesterday, and it was the opposite conversation of Todd Grantham. Like if you're a fan of another SEC school and Nick Saban hires Todd Grantham, you go to sleep at night, you're like, okay, feel kind of good about that. Ryan Grubb comes in as the offensive coordinator, you're kind of tossing and turning going, geez, why that guy?
Yeah, no, he seemed like a stud. You're right. And what he did with Michael Penix this year was incredible.
Yep.
That was the nation's leading passer this year. So, there was a lot to like about him. He's going to stay at Washington. It seemed like a bit of a long shot with him because he's a lifer with Kalen DeBoer. He's making $2 million a year at Washington. I mean, that seemed like it was going to be a hard sell anyway. So then, you get to your next level of names. Freddie Kitchens' name has been mentioned. Freddie obviously played at Alabama, has been a head coach in the NFL, coordinator in the NFL. Most recently was an analyst at South Carolina. His name has been mentioned. There are a lot of NFL names that have been mentioned. Brian Johnson, the quarterback's coach. He was at Mississippi State, obviously, with Dan Mullen, quarterback's coach at Philadelphia now. Greg Roman's name, who just got fired in the NFL from Baltimore. There's been mentions of Jason Garrett. He and Nick Saban do have a long connection. That doesn't get anybody fired up, by the way. There are people who know that say, and I cannot independently confirm this, but there's been some chatter about it on Twitter, so I'll just go ahead and say it, that Kendall Briles was in Tuscaloosa yesterday. And obviously, for those that have forgotten, he was at Arkansas, took the TCU job a month ago, if that, a couple of weeks ago, and was in Tuscaloosa. So I don't know that would. I mean, you think Lane Kiffin was an odd fit with Nick Saban, and it certainly worked, obviously. Kendall Briles would seem more of an odd fit with Saban than Lane Kiffin to me.
Man, what a journey for Kendall Briles if that happened. So
yeah,
had the Mississippi State job if he wanted it, ultimately said no on that, ends up taking the TCU gig, and now he's talking to Nick Saban.
There's a belief that happened, Richard. I don't know that I've seen it reported by any reliable reporter, but I can tell you a lot of people I know that are tied in say that he talked. There's some speculation that Scott Frost might have paid a visit to Tuscaloosa at some point. So, I think a lot of people will kick the tires on that job. I mean, you got to look at it this way. Is Nick Saban hard to work for? Yes. Are Alabama fans demanding? Yes. Do you have to be nearly perfect to get approval? Absolutely. But look at the track record of that job. Just look at the last 5 guys. They left to go be the head coach at FAU, now the coach at Ole Miss. The offensive coordinator at the Bills, now the coach of the New York Giants. The head coach of the Texas Longhorns, the head coach of the Maryland Terrapins. I mean, it's a job that is going to get you a really good job when you leave.
Yeah. When Kendall Briles was hired at TCU, and obviously Texas is closer. I mean, Fort Worth is closer to Waco than Fayetteville or Tuscaloosa or anything like that. There was pushback for a day or two. You had the online firestorm that immediately goes away because of his involvement with Baylor and whatever else.
Yeah.
Would there be any pushback at Alabama for Kendall Briles?
I don't think there would be. I mean, there was very little when DJ Durkin was hired as an analyst there. And, obviously that kind of came to a head and he left, once nationally people started pointing it out. But I don't remember very much feedback locally. And look, here's the point I've made. We've talked about this with Chris Beard, the fired Texas coach. Somebody else will hire that guy. And really, you know how it works. You got to have an iron stomach, an iron constitution for about 48 hours. Because the way this country works is everybody gets pissed about something for 48 hours and then they find something else to get on 48 hours later. And it's a news story and everybody moves on. So I believe if you can survive the first 48, 72 hours of a hire like that, you're fine. And I don't think Briles would be anywhere close to that. And I think part of that, too, is because, he's taken a couple of other jobs. And it's not like this would be the first job he took after the Baylor situation.
Right,
he's had several jobs since then.
The Chris Beard thing is fascinating and kind of topical where we are. I mean, it appears as if it's moving in the direction that Ole Miss is going to make a change in basketball at the end of the season. And I don't get the impression that that's a route that they're willing to go, regardless of whether the charges are dropped or recanted or whatever. I mean, it's pretty evident that something happened and it wasn't great. And now they've kind of backed off on that, but that's an interesting way of looking at it. It's like, okay, it's clearly a guy that is going to win wherever he is. Won at Little Rock, won at Texas Tech, was winning big at Texas. But can you handle, are you willing to handle that firestorm for a little while?
Well, and the one thing there is, as you said, not only was there some sort of incident, it became public record what was accused of him, right? So, I mean, it's not hearsay of what might have happened. We don't know exactly what happened that night, but we know what initially was said happened that night, and it does look very bad. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, it will be fascinating to see where it goes. Anything happening on the plains with Auburn football?
Kind of quiet. Hugh Freeze did pretty well in the transfer portal. He saved a recruiting class that was mired in mud when he got there. He hired a staff. It wasn't a staff that's going to blow anybody away. It seemed like a lot of guys he was really, really comfortable with. So I think a lot of Auburn fans are wait and see right now. They appreciate what he did in recruiting. They appreciate what he's done in the transfer portal. They're a little worried about quarterback. But I think it's very much a wait and see for Auburn right now.
I was going to say, why did they strike out so many times on quarterback?
I don't know. I do think, though, I will say this. I think Robbie Ashford has got a lot of tools that Hugh Freeze can work with. He's got to be refined as a passer. I mean, that is the biggest thing. If you're going to play quarterback, obviously that's pretty important. But I do think he's got there are a lot of raw tools that are there for Robbie. He's just never been, even going back to his days at Hoover High School here in town. He was never a very accurate passer, and that has spilled over to his time at Auburn as well.
Yeah, always great catching up. Good to visit with you, and hopefully it'll warm up, and we'll see you soon.
All right, boys, y'all take care.
Ryan Brown from the next round.